Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the District of Squamish regular business meeting of Tuesday, September 4th, 2018. Alfin Squalum, please to Squamish, Mayo. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. There's an amended agenda in front of council. The amendments are item 9.3 has been deleted from the agenda. We'll come back to council to tender award, come back to council to future agenda. And the motion from this afternoon, the Community Development Committee has been added in 11.1. And I believe those are the only amendments. So looking for a motion to adopt the amended agenda, moved by Councillor Elliott, second by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, motion carries. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none, we have a few delegations here. First up, we have a delegation from My Sea to Sky Climate Change Initiative. Saxby.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to speak to the Climate Accountability Campaign. I'd like to share a story with you. When I was 7, my parents took our family camping on Lady Elliot Island at the southern end of the Great Barrier Reef. I remember holding my father's hand as we snorkeled over the reef crest, watching turtles, reef sharks and manta rays. But mostly I remember spending hours snorkeling by myself in a little lagoon on the reef flat, watching a clownfish dash in and out of its host anemone, just like the one in the movie Finding Nemo. I first learned about climate change when I was 11. It was 1988. At the time, I thought the adults would take care of it, just like they had dealt with the hole in the ozone layer by signing the Montreal Protocol in 1987. 10 years later, while I was studying at university, the first mass coral bleaching event occurred in 1998, which was unprecedented in both extent and severity. Most of the reef flat where I had spent hours snorkeling as a child had bleached and died. I decided to specialize in marine science, and for my master's thesis, I studied the impacts of climate change on corals and published my first peer-reviewed paper. Throughout my professional career, climate change has been a recurring theme in all of my work, with government, industry, and universities around the world. We are facing a climate crisis, and we need to act with urgency. For most people, it's hard to understand the immediate threat of climate change until it affects them directly. Here in Squamish, it was pretty easy to joke that warmer, sunnier summers are actually pretty nice, hanging out at the lake. But BC is on fire. 2018 is now the worst fire season on record, breaking the record set in 2017. As Premier Horgan said in a recent CBC interview, we've gone from flood, and then again to fire, and we have had 2 states of emergency. That's unprecedented. Scientists are warning that the Fraser River is now so warm that it may kill migrating sockeye salmon before they can spawn. Doctors are warning about the health impacts of exposure to wildfire smoke, as well as the mental health impacts, as most of BC has been shrouded in wildfire smoke for weeks. The costs of climate change are becoming very real. For the District of Squamish, a 2016 study conducted for the district identified immediate climate-related risks from sea level rise, increased forest fires, and extreme precipitation leading to coastal flooding. Longer-term impacts from climate change include changes to river flows, water supply vulnerability, economic development, health, and food security. The district has already developed policy and taken action on some of these issues. For example, the Coastal Flood Hazard Mitigation Strategy and Flood Protection Options Report commissioned in 2015 to plan for a 1 metre rise in sea level by 2100 and a 2 metre rise by 2200. Developing these plans and implementing these recommendations to help protect Squamish residents from climate harm carries real financial costs. BC taxpayers cannot afford to continue to pay 100% of the costs of preparing for and dealing with wildfires, flooding, drought, sea level rise, and other impacts that are made worse by climate change. Fossil fuel companies are not paying their fair share, and that has to change. My Sea to Sky is working closely with West Coast Environmental Law and many other community groups across the province on a climate accountability campaign. We are asking communities to send climate accountability letters to 20 of the world's largest fossil fuel polluters, who are responsible for nearly 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and ask them to pay their fair share for climate costs incurred by each community. We believe this is a unique opportunity for climate advocacy. By holding fossil fuel polluters accountable for their role in causing climate harm to our communities, we can ensure that taxpayers are not the only ones on the hook for the cost of preparing for and rebuilding from the impacts of climate change. We can impact the global fossil fuel cartels that are contributing most to climate change and give them an incentive to move towards a more sustainable economy. And we can generate a conversation about the role of the fossil fuel economy in harming our communities. We wanted to ensure that Mayor and Council were apprised of these efforts, and we have two asks. One, for Squamish to support the Climate Accountability for Fossil Fuel Companies Resolution E128 that is being brought forward at UBCM next week. And two, for the District of Squamish to join this initiative and send climate accountability letters to the top 20 fossil fuel polluters. To support your decision, I've included several resources for you in your package you should have received, including a brief introduction to the Climate Accountability Campaign, example letters that have been sent by other communities, including Victoria and Saanich, a draft climate accountability letter for the District of Squamish that can be edited to specifically address the climate impacts that Squamish is currently planning for and the costs that are being incurred. It's been 30 years since I first learned about climate change when I was 11, and we are now the adults that need to deal with this climate crisis. This campaign is a very simple first step to hold fossil fuel companies accountable for climate costs that are harming our communities. I encourage you to please support the resolution at UBCM and join the campaign by writing climate accountability letters to the top 20 fossil fuel polluters. Thank you.
Thanks very much. With regard to the first ask about resolutions, that's up to the individual councillors to show up on the time of the meeting, and I know all of our councillors are in the resolutions session 100%. So, but councillors are members to vote as they wish for that one. But thanks for your encouragement. And we'll go for questions right now, Councillor Park.
Thanks, Tracey. So, resolution number B.
128.
128. And now the letter that you talk about sending out to big carbon guys, any way of that getting to the shareholders?
Potentially. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how West Coast Environmental Law is dealing with that, but that's something that I think is important. And it's not just the shareholders, it's the investors as well. Like it is meant to target not only the fossil fuel companies, but the investors and the people that are shareholders in the company.
Yeah, well that's kind of what I meant to do, because I know when people are complaining to me, I always say, write a letter, make it an action, and we'll get into our package.
Any other questions for Ms. Saxby at this point? Yeah, I think this is an easy ask, in my particular opinion. So I'll move that Council direct the Mayor to send climate accountability letters to the top 20 fossil fuel polluters. Moved seconded by Councillor Kent. I'll just speak to it briefly and then I'll allow Council. I think this is about time. I sat on the MIABC, that's the Municipal Insurance Association of BC, and certainly climate change has been hugely topical in the insurance world for years because it's going to cost them a fortune. And they realize that they have to become part of the solution of mitigating climate change because it could literally bankrupt some insurance pools. So, and I think the people who are producing this, who are making the most money off of this, should be paying for it. It's going to cost our municipality millions more in flood protection and a whole bunch of adaptive measures. And so I think this is an easy first step. I think there's a lot more to it than this, but this is an easy first step. Anyone else want to say a few words? Yeah, Councillor Mamquam.
Yes, thank you for bringing this to our attention. And the thing that I appreciate about it the most is that it's very, very specific in terms of its ask and in terms of pointing out what the costs to our municipalities are and what where the responsibility falls. And I definitely think that we should be taking action in the way as suggested, and I definitely will be supporting the resolution at UBCM, and it's one of the reasons I'm going this year.
Thanks so much. Thanks for bringing this forward, Tracey. And I put forward that we actually have an adaptation report done by climate professor at Western University, and Pickett's did that in 2017. We had that completed and it was published, which was an excellent report. I think that attention to natural assets as well. If we had a specific ask instead of just saying we'd like some money, would be amazing. If we, our glacier is one of the things that I speak about quite often. Our entire water supply is based on a receding glacier that's expected to, based on hydrology reports, is not expected to last forever. And with climate change, that's going to quicken. But having a specific ask, such as studying the glacier recession or doing something to help our community adapt, specifically, one thing you mentioned in the report is diking as well, but I'd love to have a better understanding of our natural assets and how they affect our community and the efforts to adapt. So supporting a letter to ask for something very specific that is meaningful, I think would have a better chance of having a response that's meaningful as well. It'd be great to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, and I think there's a whole slew of policies that municipalities are going to have to deal with, and we are dealing with them. We do have natural assets on the agenda. So, I mean, this is just focusing the attention on the people who are causing the problem predominantly, be part of the solution financially, ideally more than just financially. But there's, like, we could go on for ad nauseum in terms of all the different things that cost us from climate change, but also things that we need to do and have yet to do. So.
Yeah, I mean, water supply is a big one. The response to or preparing for wildfires is going to be a big one. The backing that has to happen dealing with sea level rise. There's so many different issues that need to be addressed as part of this. So yeah, it's there.
I'm sorry, so I hand over your Councillor Pryor. Good? Good? Anybody else? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously, and I'll certainly be supporting Resolution B28.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a delegation from regarding the Mamquam Blind Channel Estuary, and we have Hazel and Jack are on the application, but I don't believe it's them that's speaking, so please come up. Yeah, the council, everyone got this.
So in regards to the waterfront land development, we have a few questions for you in regards to what is going on with the plan. And we'd like to know, first off, how much of the tree line is the proponent proposing to keep in regards to draft plans that have been submitted so far to the DOS. Would you like me to, we have a few questions, so would you like me to ask them individually?
And we may not have the right person in the room to answer these specifically today, but we'll ensure that our staff get back to you specifically on these if they haven't already answered them. Maybe just keep going, and if council has any questions, we'll...
And in regards to environmental...
Can you just introduce yourselves just for everybody?
Oh, sure, Kristen White.
Patricia Payne.
And you're in the Marina States area?
Yeah, I'm not.
You're not?
In regards to the environmental consultants that have been providing consultation to you, will the tree line and riparian area remain intact, or will the natural ecosystem benefit by bringing in clean fill, replanting, and revegetation? Just wondering if you've had any feedback from environmental consultants so far. And also, if there is going to be replanting and revegetation, will the 20-foot to 150-foot riparian zone be left intact, or will it all come down as well with the whole redesign? And in regards to the remaining tree line, as per the bioinventory reported for this project, it's considered an environmentally valuable resource. And the government states that EVRs require special management attention in regards to the protection, and that local governments and the development community should meet the following environmental objectives during urban land development where EVRs are present. Avoid development on or near EVRs, or find ways to minimize impact from development. Design the development to protect and enhance ecological values. So we're just wondering if that is being followed by the DOS and the developer. In regards to the tree line, there's many species that have been noted in the bioinventory prepared for the development. And among them are species that have been noted on the Species at Risk Act. by the government. We see many amphibians, the western toad, the northern red-legged frog, and also there's many Pacific forest frogs that you can hear along the tree line. And even after the development has started, you can still hear an abundance of frogs along the tree line. So we're just wondering what is going to happen with when development starts, since there are species that are actually living there. How is that going to affect the development? And as well as when invasive species along the shoreline are going to be removed, plants and that sort of thing. How is that going? What mitigation measures are going to be taken to, in regards to the species and the remaining tree line as well? And we're also wondering if public input will be taken into consideration before the park plans are finalized, or will the park plans be finalized before the draft plan is presented to the public on the Squamish showcase? And will there be a public hearing in regards to the park development? And we also like to know how much time does the public have to provide feedback before the park plans are finalized? And we would like our committee to be kept up to date in regards to the park plans before they are finalized, and how can we be a part of that if it's possible?
Jonas, do you want to help
Yes.
address some of these? And some of these may require further follow-up from staff, but
Thank you. Staff would appreciate it some time to go over these questions. I know we've been in contact with the delegation, answering some of these questions over probably a period of at least 6 months now. But we will provide answers to these questions. In terms of process, the park design is going to have a public input component that's coming up. We know that the proponents are getting ready for their environmental development permit submission, and that will kickstart the process for the park design, which deals with the shoreline. So it will absolutely have a public engagement component to it, and public input will be considered, as well as the environmental conditions, as well as the flood protection along the shoreline. So all of those components will influence the park design, but it hasn't started yet. There will be no public hearing because it's a development permit process, but there will be public engagement, and it will be, at the end of the day, up to council to approve the park design, which will also involve public input.
so just to clarify, I'll come back to you in 2 seconds. There were site alteration permits given to deal with hazard trees that are growing out of biomass that has been buried over the years, correct? I think a staff person, I think Chris put out.
Yes, it was largely to do with the site contamination and the cleanup of the site.
And there's one more question. This isn't considered riparian technically under our bylaws because it's brackish water, because it's actually technically not riparian. So how would we deal with the setback issues if it's not part of our riparian bylaw, but our environmental TPs? I know this is a technicality, but...
Yeah, so we would rely on our development permitting guidelines that do address shoreline development along the Mamquam blind channel.
But it doesn't necessarily specify setback, like the riparian bylaw does?
No, not like the riparian regulation does.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask about public engagement. You said there wouldn't be a public hearing, but there would be public engagement. What type?
It will, once the proponent submits the draft park design, that will be made, there will be a public session where the public can come and comment and provide feedback on the different options for the kind of things that you would see in a park design. So there will be some draft plans proposed, and then the process will gather input from the public on the proposal as well as the different options that could be explored.
And how do you know your voice is heard? By numbers, or how do you evaluate and measure that engagement?
Well, of course by numbers, but also by the relevancy of the comments that are made. We have to, like I said, we'll have to balance flood protection, with environmental protection, which will involve protecting what's already there, the site contamination, as well as the public's interest in park activation.
And this is land that will come back to the district owned, so I think council would have every expectation that the landowner is doing a robust public consultation. Whether or not every single person gets every expectation they have, that's impossible to achieve, but I have never seen a process like this that has not taken some public feedback and actually revised plans and come back, and ultimately it will be up to council to determine if they've met our development permit guidelines or not, and ultimately it's up to council to decide if they issue the permit or not.
Oh, thank you, that's reassuring.
Okay. That's prior.
Have you been to their showroom on the site?
Not yet, no.
Because they do have a showroom. I was just trying to look it up here. I can't get too many pictures or anything. But my recollection of the whole development, and we saw a lot of it over quite a few years, is I thought it was very beneficial for all the housing on the other side where you guys are, because all that park faced you. And the park plans, there was some repairing in my memory, but the majority of it was already disturbed habitat, so that they weren't going to rebuild. And then we put a trail down there and stuff like that. I kind of like it, but I would try the showroom too. And is there any way of getting on a mail list so that you'd be informed when there was any information being shared?
Absolutely, and we do have contact information for the delegation. And so once the when the proponent has put together an application, and we've gotten to a point where it can be presented to the public, we will certainly make contact.
Will that also be publicized in the local newspaper?
Yes.
So there won't be any final decisions made by council before it's presented to the public, before we have time to provide feedback, or how does that process work?
That's correct. So we wouldn't bring that to council prior to public engagement. We do public engagement first, and then gather all the detail in terms of flood construction, flood protection, environmental protection, and then public input before bringing it to council for a decision.
And how much time do we have now between then to provide feedback?
Well, the plans haven't been made public yet, so it's hard to say. I'm not sure when it's going to be ready for public consultation, but there will certainly be adequate time for people to provide their input. It will be weeks.
And I would suggest council's expecting public engagement on this, and if it feels like it hasn't had it, they would send it back to get it. I mean, this is going to be our park in the future, so I think we expect to have robust public engagement on this.
As Susan Stratus mentioned that the draft plan will be put on the Squamish Showcase, and she was going to notify me, so at that time, will we be able to provide public input? Is that the best time, or?
Yeah, that's when the public input starts, when we put it on showcase.
Right, okay.
But we'll make the plans available. There will be an actual session where people can come in and comment on the plan. And then I would imagine there will be a few weeks after that for people to continue providing their input.
And I'd suggest you engage the landowner in the conversation. I mean, to be frank, they want to spend as little money on something they're going to give back to us as they possibly can, but also deliver something that's community amenity, both environmentally and socially, for the community. So I'm sure, go down to their offices or their showcase and say, hey, I'd like to have a conversation about what your vision is for the park, and engage them directly. I would hope they'd be very open to that. So. Councillor Pyle.
Thanks. First phase is already approved and selling. Second phase is coming to us now.
Development permit.
For development permits, so there'll be a chance to talk with them. But when this development first came to council, we had one or two very vigorous conversations about the whole picture. and that'll be on our website. You can track down the dates of those meetings. You'll see all the videos, and you'll see all their plans, and all our questions, and then there's the advisory design panel as well that scrutinizes each phase. So there's a lot of information you can dig up if you want.
And does council take into consideration that, that it is still part of the estuary, even though there is, houses going on and everything, and there's a real ecosystem going on there?
Our policies very clearly address those issues.
Okay. Great.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Next up for council's consideration is a proclamation for October 10th as World Mental Health Day, and that we light up the municipal building with the color purple. I'll move that. If Councilor Elliott moves, I'll second it. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. Consideration of unscheduled public attendance. Is there anyone here who has an emergent matter that cannot be addressed, that needs to be addressed before the next council meeting? Seeing none, we have no public hearing. Next up is 7A1, if you're following your agenda. It's Community Planning Infrastructure. We have a Development Variance Permit number 137-38541 Westway Avenue.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is UNSCHEDULED, Director of Community Planning, and I will be presenting the Development Variance Permit application for 83541 Westway Avenue. This is to allow for an addition to the existing single-family dwelling that would accommodate a new garage and a secondary suite above. So the property is located on Westway Avenue in Valleycliff. It's a residential neighborhood, and the subject property is outlined in yellow. The zoning is residential 1, and the designation is residential neighborhood. The property does have a land use contract on it, dating back to 1977, I believe, and it locks in the zoning provisions of that time. The surrounding properties are all zoned RS1 as well, and they're all part of the land use contract as well. So the proponent has applied to reduce the rear setback from 7.6 meters or over 9 meters in the land use contract. So the proposed variance does both. It varies the current zoning bylaw, and it applies the variance to the zoning bylaw that's secured in the land use contract, down to 3 meters in order to allow for an addition to the existing home that would accommodate a garage on the ground level and a secondary suite above. The site plan here shows the proposed location of the addition outlined in yellow, and the required rear setback in red, and the proposed rear setback in blue. So the proposed rear setback is aligned with the district's rear setback for accessory dwelling units. So if this was a detached accessory dwelling unit, it would be able to locate within that area. The lot shape is challenging given the angled rear yard. The applicant would be able to construct a coach house of similar size and height in the same location outright with no variance required, as the rear yard setback for a coach house is 3 meters. Now it's important to note that the land use contracts in the district, which we have many of in Valleycliff as well as other neighborhoods like Garibaldi Highlands, don't allow a secondary suite or accessory dwelling unit in many cases. However, the district has not been holding landowners up, so we have carriage houses and secondary suites in Valleycliff and in the Highlands. So it's just something to note. Technically, if the variance wasn't granted, the property owner would still have to go through a discharge of the land use contract. But as I mentioned, we haven't been holding people up to that account for the purpose of secondary suites and carriage homes.
Jonas, I'm just going to hold you there for a moment.
Yes.
I neglected to read the statement out at the end.
Okay.
Because this is a development variance permit, the proponent and members of the public will be given the opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions respecting the following requested variances. Variance to District of Squamish zoning bylaw, section 6.6, minimum setbacks for principal buildings, rear setback from 7.62 meters to 3 meters, and variance to District of Squamish land use contract approval, Guildford Industries, bylaw number 599, 1977, which in turn varies District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 277, 1968, section 2.2.7, 1D, setbacks from 9.14 meters to 3 meters. Once staff has finished their presentation, council may have some questions, and then I'll go to the public if there's anyone who'd like to speak to this variance. Sorry, Jonas?
So here's the just a rendering of the proposed addition. So this part of the building here is the existing part, and the proposed addition with a garage on the bottom and a secondary suite in this area above is what is proposed. The height of the proposed addition is, I believe, under the required height for a carriage house or an accessory dwelling unit. So the maximum height for an accessory dwelling unit is 6.7 meters high, and the proposal, I believe, is at 6.4. These are some photos from the subject property taken from Westway Avenue facing north that show the side yard location of the potential addition, as well as the existing dwelling and the neighboring home to the north. The sign's been posted on the district's webpage, as well as installed on the property. No request for a public information meeting were received, and no comments were received as through the showcase. We have mailed the notification to all the adjacent neighbors within 100 meters of the property, and we have received two letters from the property owner that is probably most impacted, which is right here to the northwest of the property. It's this property here. One letter was in support of the application, and then the second letter was received raising concerns around generally the setbacks for accessory dwelling units, as well as the height changes that have been done in the last couple of years, which did result in reducing the setback for accessory dwelling units so that they can be located closer to the rear property line, as well as increasing the height to account for the growth in the flood construction level over the years. So staff recommendation is to approve the requested variance.
I have a question that Councillor Chappelle. If a secondary suite on a carriage house was put in this, it would have to be only the second story, so ground level garage, correct?
Yes.
And there's a distance that a carriage house has to be away from a principal dwelling for fire reasons, a whole bunch of, what's that distance?
So the distance would be dictated by the building code. However, that you can deal with the separation by using different construction materials. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. You can use different, limit the window exposures and use different materials on those sides of both buildings to manage the separation.
So the district doesn't have regulations that says it must be 15 feet, it must be 12 feet?
No, I don't believe so.
Councillor Scott?
Yeah, I understood it differently. I had the exact same question, which was, when we were building, we were told 16 feet from between our house and our main house, and I'm not, this is more of a addition than it is a coach house. It's not, I wouldn't call it a coach house because it's just an addition.
Yes, it's an addition that would accommodate for the most part, the second floor is the secondary suite, and the first floor is a garage.
So just for, if it was an addition, would it still be required to meet flood construction levels?
Yep.
So even adding on to the addition, you still have to go up the required amount of?
Yes, if you're building an addition, you're allowed, actually, right, 25% of the existing floor area you are allowed to add. without meeting the flood construction level, but this would be over the 25%.
And can I just follow up with one question? If it is an addition as opposed to a coach house, coach houses are relieved of DCCs, and we've had problems with coach houses being used for Airbnb, which I don't think should be exempt. So if this is an addition, can we actually charge or make sure that our DCCs are paid?
So it would be for part of it. I believe part of it is an actual addition to the existing dwelling unit in this area here. And then the second part is the secondary suite, and we wouldn't charge DCCs for secondary suites. They fall in the same category for our DCCs. We are bringing back later this month a report on short-term location rentals, and we will be talking to the DCC issue for secondary suites.
Perfect, thank you.
Questions, Councillor Reese?
Thank you. I mean, is this classed as an auxiliary building, or is it an addition to a main building and become part of the main building?
It would become part of the main building. It's an addition.
And so does it meet the setbacks for a building, the main building, the principal building?
It doesn't meet the setbacks for a principal building. Here's the red line for the rear yard.
Yeah, well, that's dictated by the land use contract.
Well, it's both. It's located in our zoning bylaw and in the land use contract, and the land use contract would have the more extreme setback. But as I mentioned, we haven't been applying the land use contract to accessory dwelling units and secondary suites for a long time now.
Yeah, but the provision that says no second dwelling unit, no second living unit, I think it is, would be in the building scheme, and that's not before us now. The land use contract, though, is with zoning, with setbacks and so forth. And so when I look at this, I think, well, when you look at that diagram, if it wasn't for the land use document, which is a 1970s document, and you applied the standard that fits RS1 today, I interpreted that to be the blue line.
For a coach house, yes.
For a coach house.
So if it was
But not for the addition to a
not
house.
for an addition, exactly.
What makes this a coach house and not an addition to a house?
It's an addition to the house. Because it is done to add a secondary suite, staff are recommending that, they could do it either way by separating the building. So staff are recommending going with the proposed variance because the impact on the neighbors would probably be very similar because you would be able to build a similar size coach house with a separation between the house and the coach house, so probably a bit less in floor area. But would have a very similar impact on the neighbor. The side setback remains the same for principal or coach house.
And the building scheme is not going to be discharged. It will still be there. It's enforced by the neighborhood.
Yes.
And so notwithstanding what we do tonight, just as long as the applicant knows that one of his neighbors could take a run at him for violating the building scheme. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. So,
Councillor Meyer?
So the neighbor to the north there, or at the top there, he first sent in a letter saying he was okay with it, and then he sent in a letter saying he was concerned.
Yes, so the second letter we received spoke more to the concerns with the district zoning bylaw rather than what's proposed because the neighbor understood that it could be done by just building a coach house versus an addition. And I think the concerns were raised about the setbacks to the rear as well as the height. And both of these have been, the setbacks have been reduced in recent years and the height has been increased for accessory dwelling units.
Because I'm looking at the neighbor's house there, and I wonder what those roofs are that are right up against the property line there. That's not living space, that'd just be sheds.
Those are probably sheds,
Greenhouses and sheds.
yes.
And then if you look at the, like this, the front of this one's a 25-foot setback. The one to the, because it's a corner house beside it, it's only a 15-foot setback.
Yes, so this could probably be a side yard setback because normally what we would consider a front lot line is the longest lot line of the two. So I'm assuming that this is a side.
Yeah, I'm just saying that because if we fudge the rules a little bit, this dwelling here could come forward 5 feet. Another thing I looked at was the, if you go to the plan view of the back, it took me a little while to figure out which side was which.
Which plan do you?
The schematic of the building?
Yeah,
Oh, I see.
Yeah, oh, there we go. So the addition's not the part with the porch, it's the other part.
Or the inside the yellow box?
Yes, it's this part
And
here.
the second floor windows, I mean, they're bedroom windows.
Yes.
And I know when I built my house, my neighbor to the one side, I put, instead of 4x5 windows in, I put 3x5 windows in. So that you have to basically walk up to the window to see your neighbors in the backyard. That might be neighborly.
Yeah, they're bedrooms.
You know, just gives the guy a little more privacy. Other than that, because it's a 10-foot setback for a carriage house, all he has to do is the foot between those two and put a carriage house, right?
Is there a way to determine what the distance would be required for a carriage house to the primary building?
Give me a second. But I didn't bring my zoning bylaw copy.
You want us to recess for a few minutes?
Could we?
Yeah, you're in recess. Eunice, you were
Thank you.
saying?
Yes, so I looked at the accessory dwelling unit provisions in our zoning bylaw, and there is nothing in here that would dictate the distancing requirements between the principal dwelling and the accessory dwelling unit. So it would be up to the building code or the fire code to determine the distances, the separation between the two. And that varies by the type of construction that is being used, by the number of windows that are on the existing building and the proposed building. There's different variables.
And variables include what the current building is made of and the materials there.
Exactly.
Councilor Pryor.
Yeah, it could be a foot away, but it could be very expensive to make that a foot away. I would measure as 5 feet would probably be like the affordable distance for the two house structures. So, I mean, it can be done, they can have a carriage house and they can have the house. To me, as long as the neighbor.
We're still on questions,
Yeah.
the public still has to have an opportunity to speak.
Settle down.
Yes. Councilor Pryor, please respect the fact that there are legislative rules around this. I'm trying to save you from. I have Councilor Elliott and Councilor Stowe.
So is the red line in that drawing the same as the RS1 setbacks? Or is it different because of the land boundary?
So the red line represents the 7-foot or 7-meter setback. I think it's 7.6 actually, rather than a 9-meter, which would be in the R1, which is residential 1. Looking at the distances on these existing homes, it looks like a lot of them are at the 7-meter setback rather than the original 9-meter.
Councilor Spatz, are you done, Councilor Elliott? Councilor Spatz?
I'm just reading the exemptions on the DCC, and it says there's only 2 exemptions currently, pulling up our DCC bylaw, a not-for-profit rental housing and affordable rental housing subject to a housing agreement. So I'm not sure if we've been following.
Yeah, so
housing
Councilor
agreement.
Stowe, we actually took secondary suites out of the bylaw, so they're not referenced in the bylaw.
Okay, they're all, everything's referenced in the bylaw except for under the exemptions, and
Are carriage house suites something that we charge?
is it a separate bylaw?
No, it's in the DCC bylaw. Because it's not in the DCC bylaw, we don't charge DCCs on it.
Secondary suites deleted, okay. So all secondary suites, and they don't have to have any housing agreement on them.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
If I may, just to clarify, back in when we did the exemption, I think everything was called a secondary suite. previously. And now we've gone to separating out to secondary suites and accessory dwelling units
Yes.
and multi-unit flex units.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to.
Any other questions for staff at this point? Don't see any. Is the proponent here? Would they like to speak to their variance?
I am
Yeah,
here.
yeah, you do have to come up and speak at the podium if you'd like to say anything.
I think I'm okay.
Okay. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak to the Development Variance Permit in front of us? Don't see any hands at this point. Council, are there any more questions? I have a question. Can you just clarify on this? What's the size of the current structure? And it looks like they're almost doubling the size of the building. Can you just give me square footage of the new addition as well?
Yes.
To save me from looking at it.
Okay, so the existing principal building is just over 11,000 square feet.
11,000?
Sorry, 1,137. Very fine print here. And then the proposed addition is just over 1,000, so it's just slightly less than the existing building.
And so it's almost double. And is that footprint, or is that including both stories?
That is the footprint, yes.
So essentially it's a 2,200 square foot home trying to add 2,000 square feet onto 2,200. So a 4,200 square foot home will be the ultimate end result of this.
If you count the garage space, yes. So the existing home has living space on both levels, versus the proposed addition has a garage on the ground floor, and then the living space above.
I have Councilor Pine and Councilor Rice.
I'm just looking at the plans, and if you look at the, what I assume is the first floor plan, it's all cardboard.
No questions?
No.
Councilor Rice?
Thank you. So I thought I had it down, but after Councilor Alex' question, I'm not sure if I do. So the red line, I get it, is the setback prescribed by the land use contract. The blue line is proposed, but I understood the blue line to be approximately where there wasn't a land use contract, the setback would be. But then you said it went from the red line to 9 years, which would be even more of a setback.
So the red line is where the current setback is for an addition to the principal building.
Prescribed by the land use contract.
Zoning bylaw.
And the zoning bylaw. They both have a much bigger setback than what our zoning bylaw would allow if it was a coach house that is separated from the
That's not the question. The red line is the setback outlined in the zoning bylaw, 7 point.
Yes, it's 7.6 feet.
And so the land use
Sorry,
contract
7.6
setback
meters.
is not articulated in this.
It is not,
No, it would
because
be-
we haven't been honoring it.
But it would be even further.
It would be even further, yes.
Oh, I get it, okay, I had to know. Oh, my God,
It's not on the map.
thanks.
Any more questions for clarification? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to the DVP? I'll ask for a second time. Is there anyone who would like to speak to the DVP? And I'll ask for a third time. Is there anyone who would like to speak to the DVP? There are no speakers. Council, looking for interaction on this issue. Councillor Chappelle?
I'm happy to put the staff recommendation forward.
Moved by Councillor Chappelle that the districts authorize the issuance of the DVP 137 and that the mayor and corporate officer be authorized to execute the DVP. Is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Pryor. Councillor Chappelle, you moved the motion. Would you like to speak to it?
My only beef with this is our policy, not with the development application, and not taking in DCCs for the extra density, which I'm looking forward to coming back when we speak about Airbnbs. But adding this neighborhood is becoming densified, and I don't mind this application I find it innovative attaching it. When that doesn't come back to 2020 25, is that right? All the entire neighborhood setbacks?
You talking about the land use?
Yeah, the
land
land
use
use
contract.
contract.
They have to be dissolved by 2022.
That's right. I think it's 2022 or 2024. We still have 2 years. It's something that the district will have to deal with in the near future.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent.
Anyone else want to speak to this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any problem with it, and I didn't hear, the neighbor didn't have really strong words in opposition, and if he was really in opposition, they'd be here.
He did some tonight.
So I think it's a nice looking building. I do think that the second floor windows, if there were 3x5s instead of 4x5s, would be nicer to the neighbors. And I do think it could be pushed forward 4 or 5 feet to the road, wouldn't make any difference because the adjoining house is 15 feet, and this one's 25. Those are just comments at this point, but I'm just saying that to planning and the owner.
Yeah, I'm going to speak against this DVP. I generally agree with Councillor Pryor. I'd rather see it pushed forward than pushed back. I'd rather see that variance come to us, particularly because the house beside it is closer to the road. I would rather see carriage house, to be frank. I suspect that the carriage house actually would have to be quite small because I suspect you're going to probably have to find somewhere between 10 and 15 feet separation between your main house and carriage house. So I actually doubt that our current rules would allow for nearly as big, which is essentially a 2,000 square foot building. I suspect you're going to see something much smaller than that. It's very imposing. It's a 4,200 square foot building. It's very imposing on the road and very imposing for the neighbors. So the variance requested, I think, is just too significant. It's essentially almost half, if not well over a third of the building, the addition they're requesting. And I think it would, it's just too much to ask and would definitely negatively impact their neighbors. But I would be open to seeing a variance whereby the setback was on the front and not on the back. A little concerned with the 3 garages. It's a little imposing, and I think actually a variation with maybe with the front not being such a wall might help the project. But as it's presented, I can't support it. Thanks, Elliot.
I'm also not going to support this variance. When I look at these, I always look to see if applicants have made the most of the lot that they have to build on, and I feel like this one is pushed so much into the back part of the lot. And I think, I recognize that it can be a carriage house and it could be that close to the lot line, but I also think that that policy is pretty weak and we need to re-examine it. We're not trying to create neighbor conflict with carriage homes or with variances while still giving people flexibility to build. So I agree with the mayor. I'd like to, and Councillor Pryor, see this pulled forward, maybe more of an L shape rather than a big block, because I do think that it infringes a little bit too much on the back neighbor.
Councillor Reese.
Thank you. Yeah, this is difficult for me. I tend to try to give people the benefit of the doubt where the lot is irregularly shaped and it's difficult to fit a normal building or a regular sized building within a screen-shaped lot, and that's one of the examples, one of the things about this. But I had difficulty also with the size of this variance, and I could consider a smaller addition that would not offend the variance so much, but I just cannot go with this. And whether that can be solved by pushing floor area into the front yard, I could consider that as well, and not get so close to the property lines. The other difficulty I have with these things generally is when they don't really conform with the building schemes, because I think that's sometimes just a recipe for disaster, but that's really not what's before us here tonight. What we're talking about is the variance, so I'm not considering that. I've just been concerned about the size of this variance and the amount that goes into the setback. So I will not support it.
Thanks, and I thought about all of those things as well, but I really, we are trying to house families in this district, and this is a good size extra suite that will hopefully be a rental and not an Airbnb. But housing families can be difficult, and I'd rather see the green in the front than the back. The green will be the setback on the road. So the road is Westway. It's a major thoroughfare. It's not a little side road where, and there's other large buildings in this area. So I don't mind the massing of the house and the setback, and I prefer to see the green lawn in the front on the road than in the back. As well, the 3 garages, we complained about street parking. This has ample street parking for any family that's going to be moving into this lot. Will now have parking and storage, so that all of those things will be off of our district roads. So I think that because of its location, if this was on a side road or in a different location, I don't think I'd be as lenient with this. But because of its location on Westway Avenue, I really think that this fits the neighborhood with other buildings. And I think we're going to see more as the leniencies come off from the building scheme.
That's good.
I don't know, I find the addition, which is what it is, just a little too onerous on the lot, the size of it. I could see a carriage house in there, which would of course be much smaller, but I can't support the size of this footprint on the lot.
That's a black and white.
Yeah, I would support this. I don't have too much of a problem with it. It's a smaller scale infill, so I don't have a problem.
Okay, everyone's had an opportunity to speak to it. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Kent, Elliott, raised and their hands for the opposed. Motion fails. Next up, we have bylaws. First and second reading, consideration of District of Squamish OCP bylaw number 2500 2017, amendment bylaw general amendments number 2630 2018.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Mamquam. I'm a planner here at the District of Squamish.
Sarah McKenna, planner.
Tonight we are here talking to you about District of Squamish Official Community Plan, bylaw number 2500, general amendments number 2630 2018. As you know, the Official Community Plan was adopted in June of this year. During and following OCP adoption, the OCP adoption process, staff reviewed policies for errors and omissions and noted corrections and improvements. Wherever possible, these were addressed prior to adoption, but some of the substantive items affecting use and density could not be addressed prior to adoption or were not adequately addressed in Amendment Bylaw 2617, which was brought forward and subsequently adopted in July of 2018. To address this issue, staff are proposing Bylaw 2630, which repeals Bylaw 2617 and reintroduces the elements of that bylaw with changes to ensure the bylaw is more closely aligned with legislative municipal authority and governing legislation while still meeting the intended policy direction of the adopted OCP. The topics in this bylaw are identified there on the screen. I won't go through them because I have some slides that speak to those. First, in growth management, a number of changes are proposed to Section 9.2 Growth Management Boundary. Changes are to align policy with municipal authority and to ensure future council decision-making is not fettered. Respecting OCP land use designations, sub-area planning, and future rezonings for future residential neighborhood areas, policy references to extraordinary community benefits, as well as public benefits that have been removed and replaced with policy requiring evaluation of mitigating and offsetting impacts of future development from increased operation and maintenance costs for servicing, fire protection, and transportation, as well as impacts to wildlife, aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems and air systems, health and social impacts. Vague policy references have been removed. With these adjustments, the intention has been to maintain the OCP intent to direct growth within the growth management boundary and to ensure any proposal for growth outside the growth management boundary is only considered if appropriate district policies are in place and the cost of peripheral growth can be appropriately mitigated or offset. So if the bylaw 2630 is adopted, the growth boundary policies that the OCP would contain are outlined on this slide. The growth management policies would direct all growth within the growth management boundary. It would direct the majority of residential development within a few select areas: downtown, oceanfront, waterfront landing, Quest, the Tallis Road area, Ross Road and Chigai if there's accepted debris management and infill areas. The bylaw would identify future residential neighborhoods for long-term growth and clarify that those areas are not required to meet housing needs in the next 5 years, and they're not intended to accommodate growth until substantial completion of residential infill development. And that substantial completion would be defined as either a 34,000 population threshold having been reached, or construction of 75% of the development potential in those areas has been completed. And residential development of future residential neighborhood lands would be considered outside the growth management boundary if the population was over 22,500. Environmental, economic, and social impacts that cannot be mitigated or offset are considered, and policy precursors have been adopted. It is recognized that Council ultimately holds discretionary decision-making authority regarding OCP land use and zoning amendments. The second area of amendment is regarding natural environment. Grammatical error in the natural environment section is proposed for correction. The error is a result from integrating referral agency feedback during the bylaw adoption policy process. This has no impact on the policy. 2 additional policies are proposed regarding the Squamish Business Park. These policies were included in the original sub-area plan and were intended to be included in bylaw 2500. They relate to encouraging open space for employees and visitors to the park. Figure 29.1 is proposed for replacement to correct an error. That error pertains to the artisan building and adjacent single unit parcels. Figure 29-1 reflects land use designations and is intended to match Schedule B, which shows the land use designations in the bylaw, but there's a discrepancy between the figure and the schedule. And in the figure, mixed employment will be changed to downtown commercial center. And there is an associated change to the development permit area schedules, which I'll discuss in just a minute. That was the area where that discrepancy occurs. The housekeeping clarification is proposed for the DPA 3 guidelines. The intent is to clarify that these DPA universal guidelines do not apply to airport development. The universal standards are currently inappropriate given the 10-year challenges of development at the airport. And the change is just to specify that rather than general guidelines do not apply to that area, DPA 3 guidelines do not apply. So it's just a wording change to clarify what was intended in that piece of the bylaw. On Schedule B, a correction of the land use designation is proposed for 2 areas. These are indicated by black hatching in the image on screen. The parcels were designated limited use in the previous OCP. They were mistakenly designated facilities, utilities, and transportation corridor in the new OCP. The intended designation is resource and recreation, which is the replacement for limited use in the new OCP. And finally, staff proposed replacement of DPA Schedule M to correct 2 issues. Issue 1 pertains to the DPA applied to the artisan building and adjacent single unit parcels, which was depicted in figure 29-1, which I discussed a moment ago. The correction should be matched with a correction from DPA 7 downtown south to DPA 5 commercial center. So those are the parcels in yellow. And the second issue with the DPA Schedule M is to expand the DPA 10, which is the intensive and restricted industrial, from the current extent, which is depicted on the left, to a larger area, which is depicted on the right, to correct a mapping error. The intent is that the less onerous DPA guidelines apply to industrial areas. This change means that DPA 10 would apply to that larger zone. Staff's recommendation is to proceed with the first and second reading of bylaw 2630. Staff recommends a further motion of council stating that consultation occur and be satisfied by forwarding the bylaw to specified landowners and that consultation not be ongoing after receipt of any comments by the time first reading is held. The letters have been sent to these specified landowners, which are outlined on the screen, on August 24th. And that given bylaw 2630 is aligned with the intended policy direction of the adopted OCP and reflects the results of the extensive OCP consultation process, staff are not recommending that consultation is required with a number of specified governments, organizations, and agencies. Finally, there's a recommended motion that includes that the amending bylaw 2630 is consistent with district financial plans and waste management plans pursuant to the Local Government Act, and that a public hearing be scheduled for Tuesday, September 25th in council members.
Thank you. Council, do you have any questions for staff? Councilor Black-and-Wolf and Councilor Clark.
So I have a question for staff in terms of the growth management issue. Can we go back to that? Yeah,
Absolutely.
Now, I'm wondering, if we go forward, I think it's maybe in the next slide. Or Jackson, yeah, more detailed stuff.
I do also have the actual text on a slide if you want to pull up for any
Sure,
section.
yeah, that would be great.
I think that's a yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
Yes, please.
Which section would you like me to go to? There are 3 sections.
Yeah, like, and I wanted to just make that clear so it's clear what I'm referring to, but I'm just wondering also if there might be another alternative for council to consider. And I was thinking along the lines of something that's a little bit more straightforward and clear cut to maybe fully convey what our intentions are as a community and as a council with regards to growth management. So I know that in the sort of main part of the language, we have some pretty specific numbers around population thresholds and build out. And I'm wondering if my council colleagues may wish to consider doing away with some of this more complex language in order to just keep it more simple and just keep it more clear. And so it's a bit of a question to staff because I understand that staff has presented sort of a complete package here, and so I'm just trying to pull out some of the more salient points around the growth management, because I think for me, growth management is probably one of the key things that I've heard in the community since I've been on council, and that we've done a lot of consultation on with the community. And I just want to make sure that we are sending the right message through our planning document, as it is an OCP, an overarching document. So I just want to kind of leave that thought there as we continue the discussion, but I'm assuming that that is an option, is to sort of remove some of those parts that are very, very, specific, talking about specific cases and future residential neighborhoods, those kinds of things, and keep it more sort of philosophical and higher level. And I would advocate more for that approach in an OCP document. To me, it sounds a little bit more appropriate, I think. So I want to leave that with council just to sort of top off the discussion, but I'll leave it at that for now.
I'll let staff ruminate on that as well, because it's a different approach that's being presented right now. I saw a hand over here. I think it was Councilor Park. Go ahead.
Thank you. On the growth management boundary, there was a clause there that talked about outside the growth management boundary and the number 22.5.
Right up there.
Just read it here, okay. So this leaves the door open for things on the outside of the growth management if someone wants to bring someone forward and council wants to visit it. That door's open?
Yes.
Only on lands designated future residential.
Yes. Yeah, through you, Mayor. So if the land is designated future residential and outside the growth management boundary, this policy, which would be put into the OCP, says that once the population has surpassed 22,500, the policy precursors have been adopted, and there's been consideration of the impacts of peripheral growth, then those developments or those applications could be considered.
Doors open.
Could be considered.
That's what I wanted. Thanks.
Councillor Elliott?
So, just trying to explore, I think, Councillor Blackman will side this a little bit further. If we don't put the detail around future residential neighborhoods, so we just streamline it a little bit and just say, we just leave the population threshold. Because all councils have discretion to entertain proposals. Does that not clarify things, make it a little bit simpler?
Through you, Mayor Heinzman.
But still protect, the strength of our growth management policy. I mean, I agree with Councilor Blackman Wolf, we're trying to put in strong growth management policies, there's not weaken them. Just wondering if we can streamline it while we do that.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Heinzman, it does depend on what the intent of council is, how strong that desire is to have strong growth management versus having the opportunity for consideration, which opportunity consideration will always exist. But at the two ends of the spectrum, in the current what's proposed here right now, or at two ends of a spectrum. This is what will go with 2630. Yeah. What would be put in through 2630, which is on the screen, that given these certain criteria, growth or development could be considered in future residential neighborhood lands. That could be one end, and at the other end, if there is a desire for simplicity, a policy like this, F, could, rather than be amended, it could be eliminated, in which case there wouldn't be any policy around that consideration. It could be left to council to decide if it was the decision was we just want to hold 34,000 as a particular threshold, where then that consideration could be given to development applications for future residential neighborhood. And then in between, there could be a variety of criteria that could say, okay, now we'll consider. And so at this point, we know we've got a set of criteria here. Those could be, you could remove some of those criteria, you could add to it. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay. Yeah, follow up, and I think Sarah might want to help.
Okay, so I mean, I think it's important for future councils to consider the pieces that are in there. So I actually don't want to lose them completely. But we have another section in here, which is section J, which talks about considering major changes to the growth management boundary and whether they fit better there. So if we're contemplating any move on the growth management boundary, that we would consider the precursors and the policies as you've laid out with this language. But we just simplify the idea of future residential and say it's 34,000, but attach these things we would want this council, future councils to consider and to move the growth management boundary and put it there. So to me, that might perhaps show the strength of what we're trying to do with the growth management boundary and the threshold for the population without fettering council's decision in the future if they want to move that growth management boundary, but then we lay out the policy the decisions they should reflect on before doing it. So it's related not to population, it's related to any decision. But we leave that threshold of 34,000 there because that's been tested with the community.
Mayor Heinzman, just to clarify, is your thought that, and we don't have J on the screen, we just have stuff from bylaw 2630. Do you mean G, this policy? Is this?
So these, what I'm trying to hopefully not confuse people, but all of these, G is related to a population threshold. What I'm saying is that we try and simplify it by disconnecting them from a population threshold, so leave the 34,000 in there. Take out F, I think that's the one with 22,500. And then we connect all these criteria we want future councils to consider as associated with any move on the growth management plan.
And J in the current OCP is talking about the move of the growth management.
It says, consider major changes to the growth management boundary only as the outcome of either.
Yeah.
It lists a few things, and then we can also say that future councils also consider,
Add more items to that list.
and then we just move
Those items. to
these
that
items
list.
down.
Okay.
So rather than them being connected to population thresholds, they're connected to a movement of the growth management boundary as a whole, not connected to any particular piece of land or title. I don't know, Council, whether that confuses things for you or makes it simpler, but I'm trying to.
Also, if council's, and we're still in the deliberative part of this, but if council wants to take a different direction than staff has recommended here, I will likely defer the whole thing to a future meeting to bring back choices in that vein. Councillor Spall.
Thanks. I actually appreciate staff cleaning up the language. I think it actually sets a much clearer agenda and an easier to understand policy. I think the caps have been in place, and I've spoken to not appreciating boundary lines being drawn around specific properties, but more around a geophysical area and relating it to the difficulty of installing infrastructure as opposed to these physical boundaries. And I understand the ease of making property line boundaries, but I think that this language clears up all that ambiguous language around the policies that were meant to be followed, and actually sets a pretty clear process for people applying outside of the population cap. I'm not interested in going through the entire public process of an OCP again to raise the population cap to 34,000 now. I think it's 33.
Well, there is no population cap, and there's one population threshold, and it is at 34,000 currently.
I thought it was 33.
34,000.
It's now 34.
It's always been 34.
I think this language is much better than before, and I'm happy to adopt it the way it is instead of changing the language again.
And looking for questions, Councillor Pryor and Councillor Kent.
I like this wording here. I think if we vary too much off it, it's not going to be a minor amendment, and I wouldn't feel comfortable without more public consultation. Like if we're changing, like Karen said it, it's kind of, although it says the same things, it takes out too much. There is, in this one here, reference to the 22.5, which to a lot of community members was a key number through that OCP. If you remember the OCP meetings that we had, all the people in the public that came out to talk about that. 22.5. So I don't want that taken out, otherwise I'm just not going to be comfortable with not public consultation.
Councillor Kent.
I'm comfortable with the wording, so if we approve this evening, it goes to public consultation.
There's public hearing.
Public hearing.
Yeah. So for the consultation, through your Mayor Hinsman, we would send, we have sent letters to the owners of future residential neighborhood land, but there would be a public hearing process in addition to that where the community had an opportunity to provide input and come to speak to it.
Councillor Blackwood.
With respect to my colleague across the way, I have a much different interpretation in terms of the way the process around our OCP played out and the values that were espoused. And the values that were espoused were ensuring that we don't grow and sprawl across all of the natural assets very quickly that make our community what it is. And also to have predictability and clarity for all landowners across the board. Those were the two things that I heard. And to me, having the population threshold set at 34,000, in my view, is based on some very sound statistical modeling that we've done, and takes into consideration the fact that we have a bunch of brownfield development land that has now become available, and for all of the right reasons in terms of smart growth principles, compact communities. These are the things that we always strive towards, and the growth management policy is a key underpinning of that ability to send that message, because ultimately it is still about the council of the day. A council of the day can always amend an OCP as they see fit. However, it's about the signals that you're sending to prospective landowners, prospective developers, and I think we just need to be clear about that and stop trying to contort ourselves into very complicated, messy language that perhaps maybe, well-intentioned, doesn't provide us with a clear direction that we need.
Councillor Mason.
Thank you. So I'm going to move the staff recommendation to start off the discussion.
And I just want to make sure, I'll go to you first. I just want to make sure any questions about any other aspects. Sometimes we do this, we get sort of focused in on one piece of it and we don't put our minds to the whole proposal in front of us. So any other questions regard to any of the other amendments that are being proposed or for consideration? I don't see that. Councillor Race, you are going to move the staff recommendation. Councillor Pryor, you're going to second that? You want to speak to it, Councillor Race?
Yes, please. And I think all of the other things I think are just housekeeping, and I have no trouble with those. And the discussion has been around the growth management issues. I think listening to all my fellow councillors, I think we have one thing in common, and that is we do want language around growth management in the OCP, and our intent is to provide some restraints, if you like, to, as Councillor Blackman-Wolf stated, just going off and just developing greenfields all over the place. I don't think any of us want to see that, and I guess the question is really just how do we get to that point? I'm quite happy with the language that's in there. To me, it makes sense. It's relatively simple. With OCPs, it can never be completely simple, but I think it is relatively simple. I think it's clear. We have a growth management boundary. We will consider residential development after we reach 22.5. The population threshold of 34,000 has significance to us. And these are all stated in OCP, and I think any developer would know, any landowner would know, or would very quickly find out that no matter what we put in the OCP, the councillor of the day, as was stated, always has the ability to change it. So I think, and that depends on the needs of the day, the mood of the council, and so forth. So we can put that language in there. It clearly, I think, delineates our intent, and we'll see what future councils bring to it. But I think this is fine for me right now. OCPs, I think we all understand as well, that they're a living document, and you may be happy with this amendment. A couple months from now, we may want more. That's just the reality of documents like this that are widespread and quite complicated, but I think this is fine for me for now.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Maybe not as smart as Doug, but same way as he feels. And I keep hearing it now, the next council. A lot of the stuff we're doing now doesn't make any difference to us because it's the next council. So I think this is great. Staff did a good job on it.
I'll say a few things. I don't see any hands. I have a bit of a hard time with this one because I do think it's moved off the intention of all the feedback that we did get during the public hearing, the public process on the OCP. Very clearly articulated for financial reasons, for fiscal reasons predominantly, why we want to have strong growth management strategies within our OCP. And I feel like we're slowly eroding that intention as we fine-tune some of this language. So I have a bit of a challenge with this. I haven't actually made up my mind yet. I'm going to listen to my colleagues, but I am challenged by sort of the fussing with the language to actually make it less clear about what our growth management intentions are and why it's important to have strong policies around growth management. So I understand why we need to just make sure we're cleaning up the language and making it more evident for people. However, I feel like it is watering it down a bit, so I'm a little challenged by what's in front of me. Councillor Chappelle.
Thanks. You know, this still has to go to public hearing, so I would completely agree with my colleague, Councillor Race, on cleaning up the language. As I said before, I really like what staff has done. The concerns that I had when I had voted against one of the OCPs because of some of the policies in there being unclear and not manageable and unreasonable, and this has cleaned up all that language, so I appreciate that. And I'm also interested in it going, it will have to go back to the public, so I'd like to hear what the public has to say, and I think it's really important that our decision-making includes the public on this language. So I'm not interested in setting another population growth number right now and overriding this language. It may be not as strong as we need, but it will be up to the council in the day to protect our green spaces and our growth boundaries in the future.
Just to be clear, we're not changing the population threshold.
No.
It's still 34,000.
Yep.
Okay. Councillor Elliott.
I just have a question. If we did eliminate the clause, is that substantive enough change that we would have to go back to public consultation? Or if it's, as long as it's aligned with our growth management intentions,
Mayor Hanson, through you, just on the question of additional consultation required, if we were making big moves, big changes, substantive changes to the growth management, it would be wise to go and consider additional consultation if we were making big moves. Certainly the recommendations and the amendments that are being recommended here are very much in line with the discussions that were held and hosted throughout the OCP amendment process, but certainly I think we would want to consider, depending on the nature, how big a shift away from kind of what we've currently presented. I mean, looking back, we've been on a long journey with the growth management policy, and I think we've come sort of back, we've circled back to the 22.5 population piece and policy within the plan on a number of occasions. And I appreciate it's certainly the council's concern and caution around eroding the policy, the strength of the policy. One other consideration that's been in front of my mind too is just the fact that taken in isolation, there are all these individual policies, but it's also important to consider the policies as a whole. And certainly in developing the growth management section of the OCP, we were very mindful and trying to provide policy or craft policy that was kind of reinforcing of each other. So when Matt showed some of those growth management foundations, certainly we've been focusing on the amendments to these policies, but there are a number of really sound policies and that are within the OCP that we haven't proposed to amend, and I think taken together that's important to consider as well. So for example, this very strong policy language directing all growth within the growth management boundary, directing the majority of growth in those core growth areas, and then even how we've tried to frame and define what future residential neighborhoods are. So I think while the amendments that are proposed might not fully be where council would like them to be, and there might be some concern that we might be eroding or lightening up in some areas, I think just have a consideration to whether or not, on the whole, if that's where council wants the policy to be, and if there's good reason to make more changes, then we'd certainly bring it back to council for more discussion.
Councillor Blackenwood.
I mean, one of the salient points for me that happened along our discussions since we started discussing this some time ago, I guess, what was it, a year and a half, 2 years ago, was the conclusion that we came to, which was that we as a district, we're not prepared to entertain a greenfield development of a significant scale and do it correctly. We don't have the ability to do that right now in terms of staffing levels, in terms of expertise, in terms of planning. So to me, I kind of feel it's a bit irresponsible of us as a council to be saying that we are prepared to entertain these kinds of proposals, because that kind of thing is going to be driven by the applicant. And, you know, quite often, but not always, applicants' goals and objectives may differ from what our municipalities' goals and objectives are. And, you know, I recognize that for sure when you have a growth management policy, there are impacts to the community, but you have to take a look at it very globally. And if we are looking at the way that development has been done in Greenfield in the past, and we're okay with that, then okay, that's fine. We should just go ahead and do it. But I feel like there is some pressure from individual landowners, undue pressure that, you know, is causing us to reverse course or to water down what we're trying to do. And I don't want to see us do that. I don't think we have to. And I think it's our responsibility to hold strong in the face of individual interests in favor of the wider interests of the community. So I still think that we really need to be careful with how we structure this, because it's different than what was originally proposed. And I'm very uncomfortable with it.
Well, I know staff are bringing us this change for a reason. And this is what they've come up with. And I trust staff on this. If we start talking about what we perceive landowners wanting to do, I mean, all our OCP public open houses, we know there's some landowners that want to do stuff. There's a lot of people in the community that want them to do stuff. I don't want to see that door closed. This doesn't close that door. So I'm happy with that. But this does change the wording enough to make staff happy, and staff want us to change the wording of this. I'm happy with that also. What I don't want to do is pull this, go back into consultation about it, so we'll talk about it for another 2 weeks and make it to a point where I'm going to say, well, I'm not satisfied with this just not going to a whole new OCP discussion and bring in everybody. If we can get away with a simple, smooth transition here on the changes, I'm happy with that, because that's what staff have asked us to do for a reason. So I don't know why we're wanting to scrutinize it more. And if it's to tighten up our OCP and prevent development in the greenfield sites, I'm totally not in favor of that, because I know the community is interested in that. There is community members out there that I heard loud and clear at our OCP meetings that said, so I think this is very good wording, and I'm hoping that everybody, let's just put this to bed for good reason.
I have a question for staff. If this fails, procedurally, what do you anticipate looking for direction from council and bringing back? I'm just trying to think out.
Well, I think we would, our intention here to ensure that we're in line with our legislative authority would cause us to still want to bring forward an option. I think we would probably need to have a meeting with council, probably in a committee of the whole scenario, where we could try to find the consensus point, or at least the majority council in support of the direction that we would be making those changes in, and then we would need to do some drafting and ensure that that new language was in line with our legislative authority. So it would be a trip to council, hopefully in that one we could find that consensus or that supported position, and then we need to go through the process to ensure that we had it in language that was appropriate. And then we'd come back for this.
Councillor.
Do you have the wording for H?
I unfortunately I don't have it to say. Yes, there it is.
You have a chance to read it? Councillor?
Yeah, I guess, I know we've got the word consider, the adoption. In the prior version, we had adopt these policy precursors. And I'm just wondering, are we softening the language because, we're not telling future councils what's going to be in those policies. It's still up to their discretion about what's in them. But we were trying to set a high bar by saying these things matter. We actually need these in place for future councils, for this council, for future council to make good decisions if we're going to contemplate this. And so, and there's some way we can put qualifying language in there that says, so if we need the word consider, rather than just adopt,
We need the word consider?
Yeah, Mayor Heinzen, through you, we ended up throughout the entire OCP, wherever we had policy language that said adopt this zoning, change the zoning, we actually wholesale through the document ended up using the words consider adopting so that we wouldn't fetter future council. I do want to point out in 9.2F, this is the kind of companion policy where we say that despite sections 9.2A and 9.2C, consider residential development in lands designated future residential neighborhood once the district's population has reached 22.5, provided that the impacts identified in 9.2G have been considered and all precursor policies identified in 9.2H have been adopted. So those policies need to be adopted, and then in 9.2G, in 9.2 F, we highlight the nature of the policies that we want, that council has directed us to consider. So those two policies.
So those aren't contradictory? One says you have to have them adopted, the other one says consider them.
If you look at the bylaw on the whole, throughout the entire OCP, we say consider adopting, consider changing the zoning, and it's all policy guidance. So with the changes, with that consider adopting guiding policies, it's not seen to be weakening that, where it's not that it's those are policies that may or may not need to be considered, because we have the preceding policy that says all of these policies need to be adopted prior to considering any land use change.
Interestingly, that one of the biggest things the Community Advisory Committee kept harping on was making it seemed to namby-pamby. It was like, consider this and maybe do this, or look at this maybe, and one of the things they says we want a policy document that actually shows a clear vision, not sort of a namby-pamby vision. So I can hear their voices in my ear right now.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to wrap up this conversation. Thank you, everybody. Councillor Carr.
Well, I mean, to be fair to the whole process, we adopted the OCP, and these guys brought changes that they felt needed to be done, and now we're calling it mamby-pamby? I mean,
I'm not calling, I'm,
sorry,
that was so inappropriate.
I got her speechless.
no, I was not referring, I was referring to comments made by the community advisory. Okay, any more comments on this? So there's a motion in front of council to give first and second reading to the amendments as proposed by staff. Yes.
This is the last comment. I'll support this going to public hearing, but I do think that the community should be on alert that perhaps these changes have weakened our growth management policies. And for people out there who voice their concerns, hopefully they take a good look at it, because I'm nervous about them.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None. Wolf opposes. Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on, we have District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw 2500-2017 Amendment Bylaw Quest Neighborhood Park number 2624. And just a reminder that first two readings were given at the regular business meeting of July 24th. Matt?
Thank you, Mayor. So the objective of this presentation is to consider OCP Amendment Bylaw 2624 consultation requirements. Just as a quick background, on July 24th, Council gave first and second reading to bylaws 2620, 2624, 2625, and 2626. These bylaws included 3 zoning amendments and 1 accompanying OCP amendment that reflect OCP policies and Committee of the Whole discussions from April 17th, May 15th, and July 3rd. They covered a range of topics which are identified there on the screen. I won't go through them. Subsequent to second reading, staff identified the need to consider if consultation requirements outlined in the Local Government Act have been addressed with regards to Bylaw 2624, which is an OCP amendment pertaining to the University Sub-Area Plan. To understand OCP Amendment 2624, which is in question, I just need to first explain one element of Bylaw 2620, which received first and second reading along with Bylaw 2624 on July 24th. Bylaw 2620 proposes that a new neighborhood park and school zone, P5, be established and applied to land in the university area intended for school or park use by the sub-area plan. The area of the university proposed for P5 zoning reflects an area identified in covenants registered on title of the applicable properties that is mandated to be dedicated for park or school use. The current OCP sub-area plan actually designates a different area for park or school use from the covenants that are on title. This reflects changes to the sub-area plan which have been made since it was first adopted. Unfortunately, the covenant, which is registered on title, was not updated at the same time, and so there's a divergence in areas that are identified for this use. Staff are proposing that the zoning match the registered covenant to ensure the rezoning does not represent a loss of development rights, given that the covenant restricts these lands to park or school use at this time. So the area identified on the left side of the screen is what the covenant identifies as the appropriate area for a school or park use. On the right-hand side, the sub-area plan, which has seen some updates over time, reflects a different polygon. Bylaw 2624, for which council must consider consultation requirements, is intended to align the Sea to Sky University sub-area plan of the OCP with the neighborhood park and school P5 rezoning proposed in Bylaw 2620. Figure 4, the land use plan in the sub-area plan, would be amended to reflect the proposed P5 zoning and the covenant which was registered on title for the applicable lands. So the current one is what's in the sub-area plan. The proposal is to put the one that's on the right there, which would match the zoning amendment that's proposed. Development of Bylaw 2624 was guided by policy drafted during the Squamish 2040 official community planning process. Consultation conducted during the OCP planning process informed the drafting of Bylaw 2624 with stakeholder engagement following adoption of OCP Bylaw 2500. Consultation which informed the development of Bylaw 2624 is outlined on the screen and in the staff report. The consultation included engagement and requests for engagement with relevant stakeholders in the university area, including School District 48, Quest University, and representatives of owners for large undeveloped parcels in the area. Staff considered consultation conducted during the Squamish 2040 OCP planning process and stakeholder communication during bylaw development sufficient and appropriate to address consultation requirements of Section 475 of the Local Government Act for bylaw 2624. We have received one letter from Quest University regarding bylaw 2624. It included a question regarding why the P5 zoning matches the covenant as opposed to the sub-area plan. And again, that is because therefore, by making that zoning change in line with covenant, we aren't removing any development rights because the restrictive covenant already exists for that area and it denies development rights for that zone. Other comments in the letter aren't related to bylaw 2624. They reflect a request for a comprehensive planning process to update the university sub-area plan, and questions and comments regarding proposed commercial regulation changes, single unit, 2-unit dwellings, and the UC1 zone. But those are not related to this OCP amendment for which we're discussing consultation. And I also want to highlight that there was a letter received in June which proposed a design and planning process that would update the sub-area plan and corresponding zoning, and that does match the request from Quest University. So that is something that is on staff's mind and of interest at some point, but not as part of this process. Staff recommend that Council approve the resolutions on screen, which indicate that consultation for bylaw 2624 is considered sufficient and appropriate, and that consultation not be ongoing, that no further consultation is required for bylaw 2624 with the specified stakeholders that are listed on the screen, and that bylaw 2624 is considered to be consistent with the District of Squamish financial plan and waste management plans.
Feels like our resolutions get longer and longer all the time.
You're telling me.
Council, any questions? Councilor Pryor.
Could you go back to the map, please?
That one or that?
That's fine.
Yeah.
So the one on covenant, that land originally was covenant for a park. That one.
That one. Yeah.
That one.
Through you, Mayor, the one that has covenant
Yeah.
right below it was.
Well, it says covenant, so,
Yeah.
so everyone knows.
The vertical teardrop, that's
So
the
then-
horizontal teardrop.
Did it get involved in subdivision or something like that? Was there pieces of it interrupted?
The area that's in red spans a northern portion of the Quest University lands and then a large undeveloped parcel to the north of it. And I believe what has happened, and we don't have the staff here to reflect on the process, but the covenanted map was also in the sub-area plan initially, and probably through refinement of the design of the university lands has gone through some changes over time. There are many of those polygons that have shifted. The entire planning process has changed quite a bit over time, and that was what the most recent change to the sub-area plan included. And staff's feeling is that these requests for more sub-area planning for the Quest University area are quite appropriate and would be worth engaging in. And there isn't a desire to say for all time the polygon on the left is the intended park location. Staff is certainly open to a discussion around moving that. The only issue is that at this time there are no areas that are protected through zoning for park use. And so the intention is that if we can put that zoning in place now, then if we do a sub-area planning process, that can be changed. And it seems like the best way to put it in place is to match it to an area that is already through covenant restricted to that use.
So is it flat?
That is, one interesting thing is that the polygon that is in the covenant includes more area that is flat than the polygon, I believe, from my kind of very basic look and quick analysis. As the teardrop climbs to the north, it goes into steeper terrain.
Okay, so we're getting a nice flat spot.
Again, a very kind of cursory analysis. I believe that the covenant includes more terrain that is suitable for
Yeah,
school
because
use.
that's key, so I don't know
Yeah.
how we track that, whether we have to have it surveyed or get all the lines put on it, because I agree that we should be updating the sub-area plan ASAP before, we should kind of come on cease and desist any more new subdivisions until the summary plan is updated. That's good. So we secured this.
Yeah,
That's the intention of this.
that's the intention, yeah.
I'm looking for someone to move the recommended motion. Moved by Councillor Strauss, seconded by Councillor Kent. I think we've already discussed this quite a bit, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Excuse me, moving on. Rescind and amend third reading of the District of Squamish Galway Road Closure Bylaw 2561. Nerf ball.
It's the new gavel. You're done.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Nat Gill, and this is Neil Plum from Real Estate Services. On July 24th, Council gave first readings to the Galbraith Road Closure Bylaw. Following that meeting, staff realized there was an error in the bylaw for one of the closed road portions. Instead of 251.3 square meters, it read 386.7 in section 2.1 of the bylaw. The survey was accurate, it was just not written properly in the bylaw. As such, staff is recommending third reading be rescinded and the amended bylaw receive third reading.
Any questions? So we need to move rescinding first and then consider the other three, correct, Robin?
Sure. Yep.
Rescinding, moved by Councillor Strauss.
Do you have a map?
I can pull it up, yeah.
I'd like to see where.
This is, we've talked about this many times.
But is it that tiny little corner we're talking about?
Yeah, this little piece right here.
It's that little triangle.
Is that what we're talking about?
Call the question, no, yes, call the question on rescinding. All those in,
I didn't catch it.
Susan, Doug, no, Ted. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries, and move the new stuff. I'll move it. Is there a seconder? Councillor Elliott. The drugs are wearing off. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Adoption of the District of Squamish 3rd Avenue Pond Remediation and Capital Works Loan Authorization Bylaw. Moved by Councillor Lay, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, motion carries. Move that the Squamish Technology Transformation Project Capital Works Authorization Bylaw be adopted. Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. And Brennan Park Backup Generator Replacement Capital Works Loan Authorization, moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, motion carries. Staff reports, Community Development Infrastructure, District of Squamish, Zoning Bylaw 2011 Amendment Bylaw 28201 3rd Avenue, Seniors Development. And there's a recommended motion that a public hearing date be scheduled for September 25th. Is that at the Senior Center? Ms. Arthurs, have we determined the location of that?
Yes.
At the
At
Senior
the
Center?
activity or the 55.
The Senior Center.
Yeah.
At the 55 Activity Center. So that's part of the motion. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Elliott. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, steady. Motion carries. External water meter installation project tender award.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Dave Merrill, Director of Major Projects. Here just to provide a quick summary about the external water meter installation project tender award report. So the recommendation in front of you in the report is that the District of Squamish award the tender to complete the external water meter installation project to Complete Utility Contracting Limited up to the remaining 2018 budget amount of $773,122, and that the Mayor and Corporate Officer be authorized to execute the agreement. So as part of the 2015 Water Master Plan, a water meter implementation strategy was developed. After that, staff received grant funding in 2016 for implementation of the first phase of the strategy, which includes installation of both internal water meters, which are meters installed typically in building mechanical rooms, and external water meters, which are installed outside in underground chambers. And these are to be installed at institutional, commercial and industrial, or ICI properties, as well as multifamily properties throughout the district. Subsequent to receiving grant funding, staff retained an engineering consultant to undertake the design, administer the tendering, and oversee installation of the meters. Earlier this summer, we issued a public tender for installation and supply of 24 external water meters. The tender closed on August 20th, and we received only one bid. The bid of complete utility contracting was higher than anticipated, and as such, the tender value exceeded the remaining available budget. So the report in front of you recommends that we award the contract to complete utility contracting, but that project expenditures are capped at the remaining budget amount of approximately $773,000. If approved, the project will be constructed and complete by the end of 2018 and prior to the grant funding deadline of March 31st, 2019. The project is part of the first phase of the water meter implementation strategy, which is the intent is to help address water supply and consumption concerns within the district as the community grows. And I guess in terms of big picture next steps, the staff is already collecting data obtained from water meters that have been installed already, and will continue to do so until the bulk of the ICI and multifamily meters are installed, at which point a recommendation of the Water Master Plan was to undertake a water rate study. So we'll use that data and compare it to existing utility rates and to try to determine a water rate that's equitable and fair for all parties. And as part of that water rate analysis, there will be coming from the council, and there will be a robust public consultation component. Thank you.
Any questions? There's a motion, question for Councilor Park.
So, I guess once we get the meters in, they're gonna cover the cost of themselves, right?
Yeah, so through the mayor, the Water Master Plan had an appendix, was a technical memorandum that provided a fairly robust analysis of other communities that have implemented water metering. It looked at Squamish in particular and did the costing for the life cycle program. And yes, ultimately, under this scenario, water metering will pay for itself in the long term.
Over a 10-year period or a 20-year period, or?
Apologies, I don't know what that term is.
You have to stretch it out.
Yes, it's true.
Just a reminder, this is a tender award.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with this one. I was just curious what the plan was for the balance of the work, because I gathered from the report that scope of the work will be scaled down to meet the budget amount, which was $300,000 or $400,000 less than the original bid. Is there some plan to deal with that?
Yeah, through the mayor. So the reduction in scope that's required to bring the project within the budget is essentially eliminating 4 installations. For this first phase of the work, staff have sort of consulted with some stakeholders, and we determined that we wanted to do a lot of the installations at the larger service sizes, so the big water users, get those done up front, and then we can target the smaller service sizes as we move on. So removing just 4 of the sort of larger locations from the tender will bring us down below there. And then moving forward, we're in the budget process, we're going to be budgeting for subsequent water meter installations in 2019.
Thank you. Looking for a motion to award the tender, moved by Councillor Ray, second by Councillor Elliott, and also the inclusion of Mayor and Corporate Office be authorized to execute the agreement. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Feels like we've waited a long time to do that. Good job. I'm just going to quickly bring back the motion with regard to the public hearing for the OCP general amendments. It's coinciding with the seniors. The motion we just passed for the seniors rezoning public hearing. So I'd like a motion that the OCP public hearing be held at the seniors, the 55 Activity Center on the same date. Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Chappell. I'll call the question. All those in favour? Opposed, if any, motion carries. There's a consent agenda in front of council. If there's any minutes that need correction, please pull them. If there's any letters you'd like to speak to, please pull them. I'd like to pull correspondence D6. And I just want to give a shout out to Tracey, who is our one of our scholarship award winners, who sent us a lovely thank you note. Anything else that council would like to pull from the consent agenda, Councillor Pryor?
3 and...
You're talking about letters?
Yeah, 3 and 5, or 6.
I've already pulled 6. Anybody else? So, for a motion to approve the consent agenda. By Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Chappell. Call the question. All those in favour? Opposed, motion carries. We have letter 3 from Chris Pettingill regarding Darrell Bay. Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, and we had that meeting the other day and we talked to the LNG people about Darrell Bay. Councillor Reese wasn't there. Anyway, fairly interesting conversation. Anyway, in Chris's letter, and I noticed he's in the audience, he talks about, I'm just trying to find the paragraph, about the LNG guy said, we're going to need this dock for 4 years. Chris points out that they said at other times that they were going to do something in a timeline, and they never followed that timeline. So when I saw that clause, I just wanted to be able to say it so staff could hear it. If they come back with a timeline like that, every month after that timeline goes by, we have to get 10 grand out of it. Or hold them to one of those kind of deals where if they go past the timeline, they pay. And I just wanted to bring that up while I was thinking about it. You understand that?
Do you want to refer this to staff for consideration?
Yes, please.
Okay, there's a motion to refer to staff. I'll second that.
I know we're going to be talking about this again.
Yes. I'll call the question. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries. And item 6 was a letter regarding vending machines at Brennan Park. I was going to suggest we refer this to staff. I know we've had conversations about trying to make really healthy alternatives for snacks and beverages at our facilities. So I'd like staff to consider it and bring something back for council in the future to consider. Moved by Councillor Pryor. I'll second that. Call the question. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries.
Just comment on it.
Sure.
I mean, as long as I've been coming to council meetings, people have been complaining about the pop and crap in the vending machines. And we have to be able to do something about that. I just can't believe we can't do something about that. I'd rather see no vending machines, like this letter says, than vending machines with bad choices.
So maybe I'll be more specific by adding an additional motion and that staff bring back alternatives for healthier beverages and snacks in our vending machines in our municipal facilities. Seconded by Councillor Pryor.
All facilities? What would council do?
Gotta draw the line somewhere.
I wasn't going to say anything.
Yeah, I know.
Jason needs his chips and Doug needs his chocolate. I understand it. We're not making a decision. We're asking staff to bring back some alternatives to allow
Select
choices.
machine.
I'll call the question. All those in favour? Ted. I moved it. Opposed?
No, I'm not against it. I have something.
On that?
Yes. I'm just wondering about the opportunity to putting it food trucks at Brennan Park. Is that possible? Do we have future use at Brennan Park?
We
Is that-
already do.
Okay, perfect.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. We are at the end of the consent agenda, correct? Late agenda items, we have a motion from this afternoon standing committee. We're looking for someone to move that. I'll move it. Is there a seconder? Second by Councilor Chappelle. All those in favor? With regard to the yes, it's Buckley Avenue. Everyone okay? Everyone's you good? Councilor Tracey was confused. You good?
No, no.
Okay. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have correspondence for action. There's a letter from, or a referral from our MP, Pamela Smith-Jones, from a citizen on Highway 99 issues. I'm glad we've been getting quite a few comments about Highway 99 recently, particularly about the noise level on Highway 99. And I think ultimately this is something we need to take up with the provincial government. But one of the things that was part of the highway improvement project was quiet pavement predominantly through Squamish. That was part of the highway improvement project. 2 winters ago, the highway got quite bashed up, and they repaved it with loud pavement. And we're getting a lot of comments. And of course, part of the quiet pavement was they didn't do as robust sound barriers on some of the developments along the highway. And now we're getting complaints from Diamond Head and a variety of others. So I think this is something we need to bring up with the provincial government. They repaved with loud pavement, but they haven't mitigated that effect. And the intention through the highway improvement project was quiet pavement. So now we have loud pavement and we get lots of complaints. So I guess my motion is that we discuss with MOTI the effects of the pavement and the effect of the highway on our citizens, and we work with them to mitigate those effects. Particularly around sound, and we've been ongoing congestion and traffic issues, but the sound one seems to be one that's just come up in the last 6 months quite a bit. That's a really badly worded long motion, but essentially we start that dialogue directly with the Ministry of Transportation. Seconded by Councilor Kent. Anyone else want to comment on that? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Do you have a question?
Yes, no,
Comment? Yeah, go ahead.
We're at UBCM next week. Maybe that's the minister, if we have her here at the meeting, if it's possible.
Yeah, we have a meeting. It's specific to a particular topic, but you never know when you can.
We can free talk,
you know,
leave it into the story. And
yeah, I think last year, Councillor Elliott and I at the BC government reception, we were like a heat-seeking missile looking for. So we will do that, absolutely. Did I call that? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. There's a letter, a response letter from our engineer, Mr. Wickham, a response to highway safety at Alice Lake and 99. And we'll refer to staff to follow up the ministry. We've already had conversations. I've had conversations with the ministry. I know staff has had conversations. So this is an ongoing dialogue. One of the things that we need to follow up with Ashok Coke, say it that way, I don't remember how to pronounce his name, but with regard, they were going to put counters at that intersection. So we need to follow up to see if they actually did that, to get some numbers. But he had committed to me that they would do that at the end of July, so we need to follow up on that. In the meantime, we'll refer this to staff to continue following up with the ministry. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Councilor Reyes, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? If any, motion carries. And thirdly, there's a response from Mr. Buxton to John Schwartz regarding the Queensway road safety. And there's a recommended motion that we refer to staff. There was another letter in the receipt for information about this too, and And I think our intention is to make this safer for cyclists, but I think it's just, we want to make sure staff is being mindful of community comments on this. Councillor Elliott?
I just want to thank staff for doing a bit of a social media blitz to get the word out that this is a pilot project and where people could send their feedback.
Yeah.
And just my question to staff is, how long is our pilot project and when will we get a report back on, is it working, not working, what would we do?
I would say it's got to run at least 6 months to get any sort of sense of functionality or issues related there too. So we don't want to be putting out every other month.
Yeah. Yeah, I suggest probably even a year because you want to go through a whole seasonal cycle on it. So.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Move referral to staff. Moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Is there any business arising from minutes that were approved? We didn't pull any minutes, so we're good. We don't have any, there is no council, staffing, camera. Do we have any unscheduled public attendance? There was none. Open question period clarification related to agenda items. Don't see any. Council or staff announcements. Sure. Absolutely. We have two of our lovely staff who would love to give you some kudos for the wastewater treatment plant repair. And I don't know, Ms. Glende, would you like to articulate this?
Certainly, Mayor Heinzman, Bob Smith, Director of Public Works, and Ben Timoshenko, who is the manager in Public Works as well, provided quite a detailed outline, which is on the agenda for those that are interested. But essentially, key component of our wastewater treatment plant, and I'm sorry if I'm going to butcher it because I'm not technically savvy in this area, but it's the clarifier, went down, and with their staff, as far as the rest of the community knew, there was nothing wrong. And it's a huge component of our infrastructure, and one that's extraordinarily important, stating the obvious, but one that's easy to not think about, or it's out of sight, out of mind. But in terms of the environment, service to the community, this is a huge repair in both scope, time, and money, and our staff did an incredible job making sure that service continued. So thank you.
It seems like a bit of a misnomer to call anything to do with the wastewater treatment plant a clarifier. However, it's an important piece to the functioning of that facility. I think another piece, I think there's a couple pieces. Our staff acted really quickly, very proactive, did a great job. But we also had a very robust reserve that allowed us to basically deal with this very quickly in a responsible, fiscally responsible manner. So kudos to our finance staff and councils in past who brought that reserve up to a healthy level, and now we have some actual financial security both in the water and the sewer funds. So good job, everyone.
And if I can also add, because I'm just reading this well as a reminder that staff did work hard in terms of the contractors and the resources and saved $65,000 over.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Good job. Now that we've done poop. Council or staff announcements. Happy back to school. I love watching all the kids with their new outfits, all their enthusiasm, going to school, some of them moping kind of like, ooh. But I just love it when the first day of school is and everyone's excited to see each other. It was so cute outside Cracknell Elementary School when I went by this morning. So have fun, kids. Parents, you're free. No, just kidding. But besides that, we have UBCM next week, so we're very busy. Council's very busy. Grand Fondo is coming up on the weekend. Is that Sunday? That's Saturday. Saturday. Can't think of anything else that's happening. I'm sure there is. Okay, there we go. Motion to terminate. Oh, yeah. Yeah, announcements, go.
Thank you. So in the middle of August, I was the acting mayor and had the pleasure of welcoming about 100 young sailors to Squamish for the Canadian Optimist Dinghy Championships. And these are sailors between the ages of 8 and 14 from across Canada, between here, Nova Scotia, and everywhere in between, as well as from parts of the United States, and I think there's a couple from outside of North America. Squamish hosted this 3 years ago, and this is a joint effort of the Squamish Yacht Club and West Vancouver Yacht Club, in August, and it rained, believe it or not, after a nice long hot summer where it blew every day. It rained that week, and so they were just lucky to get the thing off. But it was again scheduled this year, and this year the wind cooperated. The location changed slightly 3 years ago. It was held at the yacht club and the docks around the yacht club. This year we moved it out to the ocean front on the paved area near the salt dock, and sort of temporarily set up with a ramp for the sailors. A much better location. They loved it because it's just very close to getting into Howe Sound and the good winds of Howe Sound. They didn't have to be towed out the blind channel. The magic of that site is it's very close to the proposed location for a sailing center on the ocean front, which will be just down at the other end of that apron. And so we got great feedback from coaches, from sailors, from parents about the location. So hopefully when it comes back here, possibly in 3 years, we'll have that sailing center completed for them. So it'll be even a better experience. But they were thrilled with Squamish. I was delighted to stand in for Mayor Heinzman and welcome him on behalf of the community. And operations also helped securing a water supply for us, so thank you.
And I would be remiss if I didn't thank Councillor Mamquam and Councillor Race, who stood in. August is always, then I was away on vacation, so Logger Sports, so we hosted a delegation of students from Shunizu, our sister city, and Councillor Black and Wolf. They sent me a picture. He's sitting like down with the kids, like looking at the teacher, like just like one of the kids. It was so endearing. But thanks very much for standing in for me. Much appreciated. With that, I will look for a motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Kent, second by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? No. Thank you very much, everyone.